All right, so I'll get us started tonight. Good evening to some and afternoon to others. I am Dr. Nicole Diggs, the current president of the Conference of Minority Public Administrators, or COMPA. And I am so excited to welcome each of you to tonight's webinar. Make sure you still put where you're zooming in from so we know where everybody's coming from. And I'm excited to kick off the 2025-2026 COMPA webinar series. I would like to take this time to recognize our co-sponsors for tonight's event. We have the Research Triangle Park chapter of ASPA, President Dr. Rajay Berry James. We have the North Carolina Central Graduate Association of Public Administration President is Miss Teresa Tyler, and NCCU chapter of ICMA, who the president is Mr. Isaiah Fisher Smith. So to give you a little bit about tonight's format, following my introduction of the speaker, our speaker will have between 40 and 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions and answers. So please feel free to use the chat feature on Zoom or raise your hand, and then we will call on you to ask your question. So now I have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight, my former colleague, Dr. David Fraser. So Dr. David Fraser is a faculty member in the Department of Public Affairs and Administration at California State University, East Bay, where he has taught graduate level courses in public and healthcare administration for more than 20 years. He also serves as chief of staff to an elected official in Contra Costa County, California, bringing over 25 years of executive leadership experience in local government. Dr. Fraser's work focuses on the intersection of leadership, budgeting, and ethical governance. He is the author of Grantcraft, the Practitioner's Guide to Strategic Funding for Public Service, Healthcare, and Nonprofit Sector, and is widely recognized for his seminars on leadership readiness, grant development, and public service reform. A frequent presenter and advisor in the public sector, Dr. Fraser brings a candid practitioner-focused voice to conversations about organizational leadership, capacity building, and the need for intentional leadership development in complex systems. Tonight, Dr. Fraser will speak on the topic, Promoted into Incompetence, the leadership trap we don't talk enough about enough. This will be a candid and practical session where Dr. Fraser will examine a widespread and under-discussed challenge in public service leadership, the competence gap that emerges when professionals are promoted without leadership readiness. I'm going to stop talking because I'm excited because we had more than 100 people register for tonight's webinar. And I know y'all didn't register to hear me. So I will hand it over to Dr. Fraser. Just take it away. You are on mute.
I think today is a day of technology failures, I tell you. Thank you again, Dr. Diggs. I so appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you this afternoon. We were, in fact, colleagues at California State University, East Bay, before she headed to the other coast. And I stayed out here in California. As she pointed out, I've just begun my 21st year teaching in our Master of Public Administration program here at Cal State East Bay. And of course, throughout that same time, I've continued to serve as a practitioner as well. So much of what I talk about and much of what I present and much of what I teach is really informed by those two aspects of what I do. So I tell people all the time, I'm not a 100% academic, but I'm not 100% practitioner either. So in many ways, I'm a hybrid of both of those, and each informs the other. my practice in public administration, which largely has been in municipal agencies, cities and county executive roles and senior management roles, is informed by what I do on the academic side of things. And the academic side of what I do and what I teach is informed by my day-to-day practice. And so that brings us to what we're actually here to talk about tonight. Now, I will say that this is one of those topics that we don't talk about out loud in public administration. You know, every profession has its dirty little secrets. Well, this is ours, right? This is ours. And I want to sort of call attention to it because it is extremely important. I've had any number of students who have graduated from our MPA program or our Master of Science in Healthcare Administration program who would say to me, I am absolutely exasperated because I've done what has to be done. I've pursued the education. I've earned the credentials. But those who get promoted ahead of me clearly don't necessarily have the same skills I have or the same competence that I have. And it gets quite frustrating. Or there's a position that is announced, right? And this is a very common practice in public agencies. There's a position that is announced, and public agencies will often spend thousands of dollars for a recruitment process that is not a real recruitment process. By that I mean, before the recruitment process has even begun, they have already identified someone in-house who they think, for whatever reason, would be a good fit for the position. All of these things can sort of diminish confidence that practitioners who are now entering the discipline, who are now entering the field, will have in public administration. And as members of the public become privy to these sort of practices, they lose confidence in us as well. Now, several years ago, I started talking about this. In fact, I developed an elective course about 15 years ago, simply called Supervision in Public Agencies, because we realized that there were a number of people who were promoted into supervisory roles and management roles, and they may have technical competence, but they know nothing about supervising people. I often distinguish by saying we manage systems, but we supervise personnel. And sometimes people take on these roles and they really don't know exactly what to do. And so that gave impetus to my beginning to look at this a little bit closer and write about it. And interestingly enough, and here's a little secret for you, right? At the end of January, beginning of February next year, a book titled, are you ready for it? Promoted into Incompetence is scheduled for release, and you will be the first, since I've been working on that manuscript, that I've actually presented some of the content of that book to this evening. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad it's of interest to you. I think Dr. Diggs already identified who our sponsors are, so I'll move right on in talking exactly about what we're here, why we're here, and what we'll cover this evening. So just imagine this scenario, if you will, for a moment. You have an employee who is technically a very strong employee, maybe the best analyst in the department, maybe the most reliable caseworker in the department, perhaps the most skilled engineer in that public works department, and that person gets promoted into management. And on paper, it looks logical, it looks great, but in practice, that often leads to frustration for them, for their team, and for the organization as a whole. Why? Because technical excellence does not automatically translate into leadership competence. Now, I'm a teacher, so I want to make sure you get that, and I'm going to repeat it for you. Technical excellence does not always automatically translate into leadership competence. And that's the trap here that we are talking about. So, again, when we talk about then, you see on the slide here, I indicate something called the confidence-competence gap. Right? Confidence-competence gap. What we're really talking about is the fact that there are people who may have a great sense of confidence about what they're capable of doing, but in reality, the level of competency they have do not rise to the level of their confidence. And that's an interesting thing. Now, this is not a concept that I developed, quite frankly. It came from a number of researchers and writers such as Dunning-Kruger, that's David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who demonstrated that people with lower ability often lack the insight to recognize their own shortcomings, leading to these inflated assessments, and that's very, very, very disconcerting, right? So that is very troubling, and that is part of what causes us to have to look at this subject. And so, why does it matter, right? The fact is, those who look ready in many public agencies often get advanced into roles that they simply cannot sustain, right? They look ready. They sound ready. Some people say they know how to talk, right? The question is, when it comes to walking the walk and implementing what they project, can they do it? And that's a different story, right? So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about why this problem even matters. And we're going to look specifically at what the contributing factors are. And if I may just say here parenthetically, I did provide Dr. Diggs with a link to these slides, a PDF version. So you can certainly reach out to her if you'd like to get a copy of them. I've always been of the viewpoint that when I present in the public sphere, what I have is not something I'm trying to lock away and keep private. I never mind sharing. So it's yours for the taking if you wish it. Please do ask her. And if she doesn't have the link anymore, reach out to me. Doesn't matter. I'll be glad to provide copies for you. All right. So we're going to talk then.
Dr. Fraser, before you go on, is it possible to change the view? Because we're seeing your talking notes. So to make the slide.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right. I'm sorry about that. Let me go ahead. Like I said, today is one of those days where...
Knowing everybody we're human. It's all right.
That's all right. We will go ahead and make sure we change it. This is one of those technical, really crazy days. Now, hopefully you can see, I am hoping this time around, the full slide.
Yep, we got you.
There we go. Awesome, right? So then after we talk about the contributing factors, we're going to look at the organizational consequences. I will look at some solutions and takeaways. And then, of course, we have a Q&A actually that's going to be coming up as well, right? Now, in my thinking, and Dr. Diggs can perhaps attest to this, whenever we're looking at preparing lecture notes for our classes that we teach, we always ask ourselves as faculty members, why does this matter? Is this even relevant, right? Even the course text that we choose, we often sometimes will eliminate certain chapters from the reading assignments because we don't think they are central to what we're trying to demonstrate, what we're trying to teach and so forth, right? So we actually ask, why does it matter? And if we're going to spend an hour, 45 minutes talking about this topic, there has to be a reason why it matters. And the reason why is simple, because leadership failures in public agencies are not just abstractions, right? They really are not. They are real costs to agencies, real dollar costs. And then there's real trust costs. Projects sometimes stall and don't move forward. Budgets that we plan so strategically no longer meet the needs. Staff become disengaged because they're just dissatisfied and disillusioned by leadership that do not demonstrate strength. And most troubling is that members of the public communities lose faith in public institutions. And by the way, it's not because people within the organizations aren't trying. It's because very often they're being promoted into these roles that they're not prepared to handle. I've inserted a couple of these slides along the way, and they're called Ideas in Practice. And I do this because I want to share personal narratives. I mentioned to you that I've been a practitioner in public administration for as long as I've been in the academic side of things. And I wanted to share with you a couple of narratives, a couple of anecdotes that are real life stories that will illustrate my point. So about 25 years ago, at that time, I was a department head in the city of Oakland here in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And the department that I headed was called Strategic Grants and Intergovernmental Affairs. And at that time, Jerry Brown, who would later go on to become governor of the state of California, though he had been governor previously many, many decades ago, became mayor of Oakland, went back. It was during his administration, and I went to work as one of the department heads. They recruited me from the nonprofit sector. And so we would have these weekly staff meetings with the mayor's office, and we sort of department heads would give their reports as to how things were going. Within a month of being at the city of Oakland, we had one of those staff meetings, and I had the most eye-opening experience you could ever imagine. Here's what happened. Apparently, the Oakland Unified School District had contracted with the city of Oakland's public works to take care of some of the physical plant, the schools. It was cheaper than hiring their own team to do all of this on their own, right? And again, this is 25 years ago, so I'm not trying to reflect on the current administration of either the school district or the city of Oakland. 25 years back, just keep that in mind. And so here's what would happen. The Unified School District paid a fixed fee to Oakland Public Works to do what they needed to do. And I remember at one of the reports, the newly promoted Public Works Director, who had risen up the ranks in public works as an engineer and then a line level supervisor and had, by virtue of attrition and people retiring and so on, ultimately became the director, was giving a report. And the report went something like this. We have had to repair the fence that surrounds one of the middle schools almost once every month. Whenever we patch the fence, the drug dealers would use clippers. This is in East Oakland now, clip the fence. And when they clip the fence, they escape through the fence and through the yard with kids in the yard playing to get away from the police. And I remember the mayor asked in his own way, and how much does it cost us every time we have to repair the fence? And the public works director said, at least $10,000 to $12,000 each repair. And the mayor asked, and how often have you been doing this? About once a month. And the mayor then said, well, why don't we build a stronger fence that they can't clip? And believe it or not, the public works director said, we explored that option, but it would cost too much. And the mayor said to all, and all of us are sitting there now quietly waiting with bated breath to hear the result. And the mayor said, and what would it cost to build that fence that they can't clip? And the public works director said, it would be at least $150,000. And the mayor looked and said, and how many times have you repaired it in the past year? And he said 12 to 14 times. And how much does it cost to build a new fence? And the lesson became so sobering, right? Because here you had a director who could count the beans, but only the beans in one pot. He could not calculate and strategically think necessarily about the bigger picture, right? That $150,000 would have been a worthwhile investment considering you would save and recoup all of that in about 12 to 18 months. So what went wrong there? This is somebody who had come up in public works. This is somebody who had done the street level work. We refer to them, in the words of Michael Lipsky, as street level bureaucrats, ground level, doing the work, making it happen. And now they were promoted into a role that required strategic thinking, that required not just hands, but heart, mind, intellect. That person was clearly promoted into incompetence. And so you ask, well, whose fault is that? And I would argue it is not entirely the employee's fault, but the selection process allowed a person who may have had capabilities beyond imagination in one arena to take on a role for which he was not adequately prepared. That's the nature of promotion into incompetence. It often has real world costs. So here's the question. What actually happens then? What leads to this? Why does it happen? I'm going to give you 4 of the factors that cause this particular phenomenon. Now, in the book, I plan to cover 6 of them. I figure I'll give you the majority. So if you never do get your hands on the book, you still have most of what it contains. All right? So then, And these four factors, by the way, are not factors that I found in the research literature. They are born strictly of my years of experience as a practitioner, right? Strictly as a practitioner, and that informs pretty much what I'm actually speaking about today. Let's talk about factor number one. And this will surprise some people. I argue that the merit system, as it is structured, is often a contributor to promotion into incompetence. Now, there are some HR people that are going to cry bloody murder. How dare you? What do you mean? The merit system at the foundation speaks to the matter of equity and fairness and equal access. How can you claim the merit system can lead to promotion into incompetence? See, in many public agencies, and I've worked in counties and cities, in many public agencies, achievement, hear me carefully, and advancement depends on qualifying through exams and certifications. Watch me as I walk through this now. Again, in many public agencies, based on the merit structure, advancement depends on taking those qualifying exams and scoring well on them. And on the surface, that seems fair and it seems objective. But in reality, those exams often test technical expertise. They do not measure leadership capacity. Are you with me? Come on, listen, folks. I'm an ex-preacher. I'm used to folks talking back with me, right? So yeah, what this does, those exams, I used to tell it to people all the time. I remember I had a student who was a recruiter in one of the local police agencies, and I said to her, and she was very offended by it, I said, you know what? You can recruit a police officer all you want, and you can check how well that police officer can pass the exam and score in the quiz. What you can never predict with any of your exams is if that police officer holds bigotry and racism in his or her heart, and when they run across kids of color in those communities, they will not treat them disparately. You have no exam to measure that. And that's what I'm talking about here. Right? Those exams in the merit system that establish competency, what they do is establish technical expertise. They do not demonstrate leadership capacity. Imagine a brilliant engineer passing a technical exam and suddenly being in charge of people. Notice I said an engineer, right? Being in charge of people, of budgets, of politics. Their technical skills may have gotten them the job, but their new responsibilities require a whole different skill set. So the system, the very merit system that we applaud and that we celebrate for its fairness and equity, that system unintentionally elevates doers, hear me now, that system elevates doers into roles that demand leaders. That's a troubling thing. And what's troubling about it is because most of our public agencies rely heavily on the structures of the merit system. So that's one of the contributing factors. That's one of the things that leads to this promotion into incompetence. But there's more. Here's another one. The other one, and again, this is going to make some folks very upset, the practice of prioritizing promotions from within. Now, let me make a disclaimer here. It is my belief that organizations that groom people internally and prepare them for promotions and in fact promote them tend to have better sustainability. So to be clear, I am not suggesting that there's something intrinsically problematic with promoting from within. What I am suggesting is promoting from within without preparation for promotion is the problem. Right? So there's a noble intent to promoting from within, but I also say there's a pitfall that comes with seniority, right? So the connection, the willingness to promote from within, and I'll tell you another quick little anecdote. One of the cities here in the Bay Area, whom I will not, city I won't bother to name, they invited me to come in and do an assessment for the organization. And here's why they invited me to do the assessment, because they noticed that they would have people trained and certified. And as soon as they reached a certain level, those individuals would all leave and go to neighboring cities and other agencies. And they were saying, we can't understand why. Why don't they stay? So we're spending all this money to train them, to get them ready, and then they just come in, they get it all, and then they're gone. And so I said, well, how much information do you want to give me? And the HR director was very, cordial and provided all the information and all the stats. And I noticed a particular trend. In this particular trend, for all except for one of 10 senior management positions they had recruited and hired for in the past 5 years, only one was from an internal candidate. All the others were external. And I looked at it and I said, it may be that you have managed to convey to your employees that you are operating a temp agency, that they can get but so far and no further. So to be clear, I am not suggesting that we shouldn't promote. What I am saying, though, is that even though I support the principle, right, what I think needs to happen is that we need to make sure people are prepared to be promoted internally, not just promoting by virtue of the fact that they happen to have seniority, right? That's important. The person who has been around the longest is not always the best fit for management. It's really that simple. So because a person has been around for a long time doesn't mean they're the best fit for management. When this happens, you may gain continuity because you get somebody who has been around can tell you what happened 5 years ago, but you risk what I consider a misalignment between that individual's strength and the responsibilities of leadership. I talked a little bit earlier about the confidence competence gap, and this is part of the issue. Many of these individuals feel that they are deserving of those promotions. I've been around a long time. I should be next. It should be automatic. By the way, I will tell you something that's very interesting. Just a few weeks ago, the county where I serve as the chief of staff, Contra Costa County, did a recruitment for a new chief executive officer of the health system. Now, we have one of the largest regional health systems in California. And there was a health officer who had been serving as the interim CEO and applied for the position to become the CEO. But ultimately, the board brought in someone else external. And I watched this because I've talked about this a lot over the years and I've studied it. And I began to wonder immediately, what does this mean for the organization? The person who was overlooked arguably was competent, but the board that was doing the interview, they concluded that the external candidate brought greater competency in terms of the abilities that that person brings to the table and also the needs of the organization. So what should they do? Well, I watched what the board members did next. They reached out to the internal employee that was not secured, and they practically boosted that person and talked about the fact that this is not a case where you are not good enough. It's just that we have these special set of circumstances, and this external candidate brings this special set of skills. So when you're going to overlook someone internally, so that you don't create someone who is willing to damage the organization or damage the institution because they were overlooked, there is a job that you have to do to clean that up. Right? So we've talked about two factors that lead to this promotion into incompetence. The first one was what? Anybody? The structures of the merit system. And what was the second one? Promotion from within without preparation for promotion. And the third factor I want to talk about this afternoon is really lack of training and mentorship. Now, I got to tell you, I'm almost hesitant to use this kind of language because it really sounds so simplistic. I mean, when we talk about the structures of the merit system, oh yeah, that sounds really sophisticated. When we talk about promotion from within, that sounds so sophisticated. But then we get to lack of training and mentorship, that sounds almost so much like a cliche. All right? Talk about lack of training and well, so here's the thing. If we do not train people in organizations and prepare them for roles that are on the horizon, what we're doing is that we're assuming that leadership comes by osmosis. That somehow if they just hang around long enough, they'll pick up how to be a leader. All right? Well, let me tell you something. Unless you adopt a child or give birth to a child or raise a child, you can hang around parents all you want, but you will never learn to be a parent by osmosis. I was telling my research methods class last night that when you're looking at variables in statistical research, proximity does not equal relationship. Because two variables exist on the same plane and in proximity to each other, there is no guaranteed correlation by virtue of the fact that they're in proximity to each other, much less cause. And it's the same principle that applies here. A person simply being in an organization and learning about the organization for a long period of time, that alone does not make the person capable of leading. Someone has to intentionally teach them how to be a leader. I remember I was looking at some lecture notes from a class I taught, I don't know, maybe about 15, almost 20 years ago. And I was talking about the fact that in the United States, particularly in the 1960s and the 1970s, 1980s, even institutions like Harvard held the view that leadership was more hereditary than learned. So they thought that you needed to have a genetic predisposition to leadership. And by some amazing coincidence, women somehow never got the gene in the way these men thought. And persons of color hardly ever got the gene too. That was the principle that many of them espoused even into the 1980s, right? And there was a time when a lot of schools of public administration were nestled in schools of business. And in business schools, this is the principle they advanced out there. But let me tell you something. I believe leadership can be taught and leadership can be learned, right? And that's an important principle for us to embrace, because as we prep employees for the future and the next generation, we need to make sure that we are in fact preparing them. So there's this gap in the support that employees actually need. We're going to think they're going to figure it out. I've seen so many employees fail because nobody took their hands and walked them. Look, I'm a chief of staff and I always have a deputy chief of staff. And I tell them all the time, I've been around this thing a whole long time, and I'm going to make sure you learn everything I know. By passing on knowledge to the next generation, it doesn't destabilize us, it stabilizes our institutions for the future. And if you're like me, you are passionate enough about the public sector and public agencies that they will continue to thrive long after we are gone. That is what motivates me. I need for the next generation, as I step aside, to be able to come in and say, I can do this because Fraser didn't mind showing me his notes. He didn't mind telling me how to navigate conflicts in an organization. We lead, we identify those with potential, and we urge and we encourage them. Factor number 4, the last one I'm going to talk about today, because I want to give you some solutions before we start our question and answer period and our further discussion. Factor number 4. And this one disturbs me as someone who works in academia. There has been a recent de-emphasis on public management education and public administration education. I concede, I have a bias. I teach in public administration. I value public administration education. But I've also seen as a practitioner what skill sets, what critical thinking skills in particular, a good substantive public administration program, leadership program, management program brings to the employee in terms of enhancing their capabilities within an organization. But what has happened in recent years, I've noticed in public agencies, is this notion that, well, you don't really need that. You don't really need that. And no, that's not across the board. I read a study by Vanderloo that was published about 5 years ago. I think it was based in the state of Arizona, where they did a survey of cities in Arizona. And the cities in Arizona, by and large, most city councils, preferred to hire a city manager who had a master's degree in public administration over a master's degree in business administration or any other discipline, in fact. right? So I'm not suggesting by any means that there's a wholesale bit of discarding of public administration education, but in some sectors they are. I've met with city managers who have said, look, I just need somebody who can crunch Excel numbers. So what I need really is an accountant. I don't need someone with a degree in public administration, because these administrators themselves often lack, and by the way, this particular administrator had an MBA. Right? And I'm not knocking MBAs. I did an MBA before I did an MPA. All right. So I'm not knocking it at all. But that person did not understand the value in terms of what public administration education brings. And so what we have is this weakening of the education structure that prepares individuals to work in the public sector. Many agencies value policy analysis and the technical specialization, but they don't understand the value of leadership and management education. And I think that's a critical issue that we should be concerned about. Now, our time is kind of running away from us, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to skip the next idea in practice and go straight to the takeaways so that we can get to those Q&As that we talked about. So these are really the four things that I need you to understand as you leave. One, that technical skills, technical know-how, technical knowledge does not equal leadership capability. That's important. Number two, promoting individuals without a clear understanding of the level of competence they have has hidden costs for the organization. I shared a very glaring example from 25 years ago, the city of Oakland, but there are other cases even more troublesome, right? But I also want to tell you that if we want to create a generation of effective leaders who are promoted into competence as opposed to incompetence, we need to start creating these leadership pipelines, right? We need to start creating leadership pipelines so that individuals can learn, can understand how to get there. So how do we do all of this? Let me just go through quickly all of these, and then we'll come to a point where we'll just do a little bit of a pause here, right? We talked about the fact that technical excellence does not equal leadership competence. A few years ago, I was invited to present at a conference, the Municipal Management Association of Northern California, and they said, "Would you talk a bit about differentiation between line level employees and supervisors?" And I said, "Are you sure that's exactly what you want me to talk about? What is it you're trying to convey?" "Well, what makes for a good manager? Is it like the most experienced line level employee?" And I remember I looked at the MMA&C person and I said, "I'll give you one simple sentence. And if you can work with this sentence, if you can live with this sentence, and if you can just still want me to come and not be mad with me, we've got a deal. And it is this: we hire line level staff to typically work with their hands, to do the tasks. We hire managers to work from a point of cognition with their minds, to strategically think about not just how to do it, but why it must be done." And the person kind of looked a little twisted. I said, "I'll tell you what, Ralph Waldo Emerson is purported to have said, the person who knows how to do something will always have a job, but the person who knows why it is done will always be his boss." And she said, "Aha, bring it." And I presented in Sacramento, California, an expanded discussion on that topic. This is what we're driving at here, right? Competence with your hands doesn't always equal competence with your head. And what we need in leadership are not just people who could do more of what the line level employees are doing, but we need people in leadership who are able to think through the processes to know not only how, but why and why not. That's the critical difference right there, right? What else? Those hidden costs? Turnovers. Employees are leaving because they're disheartened. Project delays, fiscal waste, and burnout. Now, about those pipelines we talked about. We've heard the term succession planning, and most times we think it refers to executives in organizations handpicking the next leader. That's not what it means. Succession planning means creating a robust framework of leadership, future leadership in your organization, in your department, cross trainings, mentorship, all of the above. And now for this one. I wanted to get to this before our time runs out. You know what it has to do with? The practical tools. Yeah, and I want to go to that second one, 360 feedback. You know what that is? Well, 360 feedback is an interesting tool because what it does is that it sets up a framework for evaluating an employee's performance, not just from the supervisor or manager, but from her peers as well. So we all evaluate each other. Now, here's the thing. This is not easy to do, and it doesn't always turn out to be fun. Last spring term, I tried something for the first time in one of my classes where I had groups working on an exercise and had them evaluate each other. And they were hesitant to actually evaluate their peers' performance because they think they're snitching. And it wasn't until I assured them that everything they shared was confidential and no, your peers won't know, were they willing to be candid and say, well, yeah, didn't exactly show up to the meetings, right? Sometimes your peers are in a better position to evaluate what you are doing, right? There are times I do not allow myself, after having done this for such a long time, I still don't allow myself the luxury of thinking that I know all there is to be known. I understand all there is to understand. I still reach out to friends and colleagues and say, what's your thought? What could I do differently? I'm a perpetual learner as much as I am a teacher. I am constantly learning. And so, yes, we have to look at ways to stretch people's minds and evaluate and hear. And by the way, we have to rely on associations like COMPA, by the way, because you can't learn everything in the workplace and you can't learn it all in the classroom. But you can come to conferences, and COMPA has a conference coming up next year. I saw the thing out there. Those are the types of opportunities you have for engagement with peers and so forth, and to also build your own understanding and expertise and develop your own sense of leadership. I'll leave you with this, and then we can talk about some questions and answers. First, the leadership trap that we've discovered and talked about and discussed today is very real. This idea of promoting into incompetence, but it is not inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way. We have the ability as public administrators, practitioners, and academics alike to change that story, right? Second, if we're going to be successful with addressing promotion into incompetence, we really have to do so with intentionality. We just can't assume people are going to get it, right? If you go to a library, there are lots of books that people never read. Am I correct? So putting it out there, just leaving it on the table means nothing until we intentionally create an avenue for people to learn and to grow and to expand their capabilities, right? So this is important. Intention means deliberately preparing people for leadership instead of leaving it to chance. And these are the building blocks. And if we're serious about strengthening public sector leadership and public service with these lessons in mind, we really do have to move forward from there. I think I've preached enough at you this afternoon. So let's hear what you have to say. Any thoughts or questions? Dr. Diggs, I'll turn it over to you.
I think we have a question from Marisol. She has her hand up, and then we had three questions that I captured in the chat.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Diggs and Dr. Fraser. Yeah, so when you were talking about having the exams, it's pretty interesting because I worked for the city of Oakland in the library, and they had an exam, and it was written for not, the city of Oakland. They would ask us certain questions, and I would answer it the correct way, but they would be like, no, that's wrong. I'm like, but that's not how we would do it here. It's kind of skewered.
Mhm.
And so it got to the point where, I learned the answers that they wanted, but I was there for so long that they weren't promoting from within. And they would have people from New York and other states even told me, hey, you don't belong here. And I was like, wait a minute, I was born and raised in Oakland. Don't tell me I don't belong here. And so they would promote people that came in that did a little less than me on the civil service. And so, but I would have to go and save them because like if a situation came up, they'd be like, what do I do? I'm like, first of all, you need to calm down. And, then I would have to kind of lecture them. So, the whole promoting within, it just depends on the institution, because I know that the library was not about doing that. And it was about who you became friends with. So I am happy to know that there is like, I wasn't going crazy and things like this do happen. And that's why I'm happy to be taking this public administration classes so that I can see the opposite side and, realize that there might be intentionality or why not. But, anyway, thank you for the lecture.
If I were to respond to that, I certainly understand exactly what you're saying. The solution there is really not to say to you that there are others who outshine you, and so yeah, we need to keep reaching out. The solution is actually to say, here are some areas we think you can benefit from some development that would get you the role. Let's help you prepare for it. Let's help you train for it. That's the proper solution, right? A forward-thinking public management and forward-thinking public administrators. The very notion that, oh, well, you just have a few skill sets that are missing, that's not enough, right? That's not enough. By the way, you raised something else. You said those who get promoted typically are the ones who are favored. That is actually one of the factors I raise in the book that we didn't have a chance to discuss today, right? Favoritism or personal preference of the senior management. That often leads to promotion into incompetence as well. And guess what? You have to go rescue those same people, right? Don't you? Wow, troubling, but thanks for sharing that.
Brian, you can go ahead, take yourself off mute.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, when that last part that you mentioned about, well, I'll just more get into the commentary what I want to say, and then a question. So I have seen in my experience times where people act like they know what they're doing and they sound like they're confident, but then if there's any kind of like question or say like, well, why do we do that way? And if there's some sort of hesitancy or they kind of dismiss it, to me, that's kind of a red flag of
Yeah.
like, okay, like actually, do they understand what they're doing, or are they guessing and they're just pretending? Because I'd rather want to do it either not necessarily the right way, but like what's the most appropriate way to do it, like the most effective way. And so in terms of what I'm thinking about leadership as it has evolved, is I think one of those things that has become sort of a newer concept is the idea of vulnerability, and thinking
Yeah.
that's used to be like a weakness, like you got to hide that, you can't show that because then you're not really showing like real leadership. But now I think that's being more accepted. So I guess one of my kind of just questions I wanted to throw out there is like, what do you think is at least some other quality? It doesn't have to be like the grandest thing, but just another quality of leadership do you think that has emerged more recently?
So first things first is the idea you raised earlier about vulnerability. The notion is that leaders should, in essence, be able to show the human dimension of their craft. And the human dimension means acknowledging your limitations, right? That, look, you can't do it all. Acknowledging your limitations, acknowledging that there are some things that need to be done that you don't fully understand, right? So the limitations is what you're talking about in terms of vulnerability, right? I can tell you this. One of the lessons I've learned over time personally, and you ask for anything that's new, I don't consider it new. I just consider it not having been used extensively, right? Leadership's hand is strengthened when you do not neglect to share the moments of achievement with the people who help you to achieve. All right. Now, there are some people who have this notion of leadership that the team that works around me, their job is to do the grunge work to make me look good. And so I go to the board and I do the presentation and I get the credit, but they're the ones that doing the work behind. And I would argue, on the other hand, that leadership evokes greater commitment, right? A greater passion for service if the glories of the moment are shared with those who help to make it happen. That's a key principle that I've embraced for a very long time. You talk with any of my employees, they will tell you, oh, he's apt to make us put our name on it. And he would say, yes, I saw it and I endorse it, even though he may have written a half of it. I often say to my employees, who are all, very much, pretty much younger than I am, and are now coming up in public administration, that I have achieved what I need to achieve. Now let me help you put your stamp on something that gives you a bright future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Carlson, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes. I had a question. So it seemed to me with a lot of like, for example, promotion from within, faculty training and mentorship, and even like the emphasis of public management, they all come with like the idea that you are passing from a high quality manager to another person who you're trying to make high quality. But a lot of what I've noticed is that, at least with nonprofits, what I work with is that a lot of the times they don't ever have that quality manager. So what would be your advice for somebody where there's no option for that like organization or group to have great training or promotion from within like planned when they never had that one really good manager in the first place?
Yeah, yeah. The challenge for most nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, or for those who are outside of the immediate United States, they refer to them as NGOs or non-governmental organizations. Um, Really, what you end up finding is that they tend to work on shoestring budgets. They tend to be smaller. The vast majority of nonprofits that fall under Section 501c of the Internal Revenue Code, and you probably know this, there are 30 subsections of 501c, but most people know primarily of the 501c3s because that's the primary nonprofit, right? But there's several others. There's C7s, that are fraternal organizations, C6s are chambers of commerce, et cetera, right? Most of them are smaller organizations and they don't necessarily have the resource to hire people who command the biggest salaries and may have the greatest amount of expertise and so on. So what exactly do you do with that? Now, I came out of the nonprofit sector before coming into public administration, but my years in the nonprofit sector were always with larger nonprofit organizations, such as the Urban League. I worked with the Urban League for a few years, helped them to develop a program for HIV case management years ago in New York. I worked for Volunteers of America, also another national nonprofit. But I've also assisted smaller nonprofits that are community-based. And one of the things I will say that nonprofits, small nonprofits tend to do is that they want people to be committed to the work. So they tend to hire, let's say, a half-time executive director, thinking that if I hire a half-time executive director, that person is at least committing some part of their day for some minimal compensation to the work of this organization. But you know what I found for smaller nonprofits, what they can do? Nonprofit organizations in such a financial position are often better off reaching out to a volunteer force that has retired out of more robust experience and bringing them back, and they often would do it. I worked with a nonprofit in East Oakland several years ago, right? And they were in need of an executive, and they said, the board said, we don't have enough money. So do you know what they did? They reached out to what was then Washington Mutual Bank, which has now been bought over by Sears, by Chase, sorry, right? And they said, look, we are looking to see if you would lend us an executive to help us develop the organization for the next year. Do you know Washington Mutual did it? They sent them an executive who had been accustomed to robust stuff and running large organizations. And he took that small little nonprofit from a small, tiny little donor base to something more robust. The solution for small nonprofits is not always to try to mirror the big girls by going straight for hiring that chief executive. Use the volunteer force if it can help.
Thank you.
Salvador, we're gonna give 1 second. We had a couple questions in the chat. Please hold on to your question. We're gonna get back to you. And I just want to ask if anybody could stay on for additional 10 minutes. We started a little late. I want to make sure that this conversation keeps going. I didn't see anybody
Excellent.
drop off, so we're good to go. So one of the questions in the chat is, what is your opinion about leaders who also do not have some technical expertise? And I'll add to that and say they don't have any technical expertise.
You know, this is an interesting thing, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, to be honest with you, right? If you were to say to me, we're going to hire you to supervise some nurse case managers, I'm going to look at you like, have you lost your mind? I know nothing about nursing or clinical work. I'm the wrong person for this. But what happens in a lot of organizations is that we tend to add functions to people's portfolios that they're not necessarily prepared for, right? On the one hand, and this is what I mean by a double-edged sword. On the one hand, employees tend to respect a person who can not only tell them what to do, but can jump in and show them how to do it as well. They do. There's no two ways about that, right? That's why I'm saying I would make a bad supervisor for nurse case managers. It won't make any sense because I would not know where to begin, right? On the other hand, we don't hire managers for another line of redundancy to do more handwork. We hire managers to coordinate the handwork. So which one do we prioritize? Do we prioritize the person who has the skills and the experience, who can demonstrate to employees, don't just do what I say, but do what I do. What I do, this is how it's done. Or do we hire someone who may be a little bit divorced, and I use the term loosely, from the practice of it, but they understand on a more global sense how to do this? I would argue that it depends on the type of organization and the type of work you're doing, right? If the tasks are primarily administrative, that's one thing. But if the tasks are functionally tasks that require a particular skill set, such as what I just described, public health, nursing, or something like that, it may make sense to have someone who has both the on-hands experience and the leadership and management skills. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's almost circumstantial.
Okay. That kind of leads to this next question. What is your insight on individuals not getting the leadership training because that's above their pay grade right now? It's a very big challenge that is being faced, that someone may be willing to get trained. Performing the leadership task is outside of the current scope.
Yeah. I'm going to share a little story with you as a quick anecdote of something that happened. There was a woman in our Master of Public Administration program working for a particular organization. She was an administrative assistant, but she wanted to change the trajectory of her career, so she decided to come and get a master's degree in public administration. And when she was finished, she was sure they would promote her into something out of that administrative role. And a year later, she sat in my office and she was in tears. She's saying, they're not giving me an opportunity. And I looked at her straight in the face as a young African-American woman. And I said, I'm going to be very candid with you. I said, you know what? Before you got this degree, they saw a secretary. And do you know what they see now? A secretary with a master's degree. I said, in order for you to demonstrate your value, and you have value, it may be time to leave that organization and take those skills elsewhere. She did, as a manager. I'm sorry, there's no easy way to answer that. If they have pigeonholed you and they have decided that you are not of the caliber they want to invest in, then that may not be the place for you, because they will always hold you back from achieving all that you can be.
All right, there was the mic drop. They need to have that emoji as part of Zoom. Thank you for that. We got two more, Salvador, two more. What do
By the
you
way, I want to give a quick shout out to one of my colleagues in Contra Costa Company, Contra Costa County, Michelle Perry, who is on the Zoom. She's a skilled person working in the code enforcement sort of arena. And I'm glad to see you here, Michelle. Mhm. Go
what
right
do
ahead, please.
what do you think of the Peter principle that
Yeah.
people rise to their level of incompetency?
So the Peter Principle is, of course, is classical organization theory and came out of the 1960s. And I addressed that in detail in my upcoming January publication. When I talk about promotion into incompetence, it takes it a little step further because what that idea argued was that you will only rise to the level of your incompetency. What this principle talks about is that you will only rise to the level of what you are taught or trained to be. My argument here is not so much about people failing to reach their competency level. My argument here is that the management and the organizational framework is actually responsible for moving people from competence into incompetence by not making wiser choices or at least not training people to be better equipped. That's the differentiation for me.
So last question on here, and then Salvador will take us to the end of our webinar. Recruitment is tough right now. A lot of companies mention it is about having someone internally put a word in for you to get a job.
Yeah.
My question is, do you believe that these tendencies are relevant to getting the role as much as it is in getting a promotion?
There's a part of me as a public administrator that wants to say, oh, that's not true. But the truth in me says it is 100% true. I can think right offhand, within the past 6 months alone, of at least 2 to 3 major senior management executive level recruitments that I am privy to in local government, where the recruitment process was a pretense. One cost $100,000 when they knew, listen, they knew that there was a person internally. So what exactly causes this? Well, one, there's a pressing demand that there should be equity in the process. It should be open and everyone should get an equal shot at trying to get this job. So even though they know that that is not what they're trying to achieve, they will at least pretend to have met that requirement. And I wrote a blog article on this some time ago, and I remember sharing it on LinkedIn, and a number of people reached out to me and saying, I've been struggling with this. I've applied to so many jobs only to discover that they went with someone who they had in mind from the very, very get-go. The problem is I have not found the answer to that problem yet, but it is real. And to me, it destroys the integrity of the public administration sector. And even though I don't have an answer for it, we'd better come up with something soon because it really has to stop.
All right, Salvador.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned early on that technical skills tests aren't a good measure of leadership capacity or the human components of management. When it comes to assessing leadership competence, how should companies approach this during the recruitment process?
Scenario modeling. Scenario modeling. You can, a leader can be given a complex scenario, but because she's a leader at heart, she can come up with a resolution to it on the spot, right? I have done this in interviews recently, and I'm in the process of interviewing for a couple of positions myself where you got a kind of a big delay going on, but working on it. And you better believe I'm going to say, let me ask you something. Assume for a moment that such and such were to happen. What is your visceral reaction to this? What do you think you're more likely to do? Don't tell me what your textbook says you ought to do. Tell me what you are likely to do. Scenario modeling does not necessarily just put a person on the spot, but it gives you the opportunity to observe what their instinctive response is, as opposed to one where they went and asked ChatGPT to help me write a good answer for that question. Right? That's one of the ways of measuring leadership. Now, there are leadership assessment tools out there, but they're sophisticated and they're expensive. For example, there's a Taylor and Johnson temperament analysis, and there are several others. You know, I remember years ago when I was an undergrad, I took the Taylor and Johnson temperament analysis, and it said your number one choice for a profession should be a university professor. And back then I said, oh, that's so funny. That's hilarious. Never. Well, hello. There we are, right? So there are assessment tools that can measure leadership capacity. But again, those are usually administered by licensed professionals, and they're expensive to do. So as a manager, as a hiring person, I look at scenario modeling and see what people come up with. Not because one answer is wrong and one is right, but just to get a sense as to their ability to be adaptive to the circumstances as they emerge.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone. We have reached the end of our webinar. I would like you all to use your icons and do the celebratory claps and the hearts and the thumbs up and all that great stuff. And join me in thanking Dr. Fraser. It is always a joy to hear you speak. But we thank you for your time and this timely discussion of factors that are influence being promoted into incompetence and these practical tools to overcome this. We also look forward to your upcoming book. So thank you so much. To conclude this, I would like to share that COMPA, the Conference of Minority Public Administrators, will be coming to Durham, North Carolina. Our conference title is Building Futures by Bridging Divides, Public Servants Charting the Course for Tomorrow's Governance. I shared the link to our website online. If you all have the time, please take a picture of this QR code so you can get more information. But when I send out your thank you for joining us today, a copy of the slides, I will also send some more information about COMPA. And I just, again, thank you all for joining us. Again, we hit triple digits of attendees. So you know this is a very timely conversation. And again, just thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you at future COMPA webinars hosted in October, November, January, and then the conference in February. So for everyone, have a great evening and thank you.
Just before you go off, folks, I'm just so really excited because I just looked up and I saw my baby sister, blood sister. This is an actual sister. She's Dr. Suzette Reynolds. She's a medical doctor, and she is a chief medical officer for a municipality. I'm excited to see her in the audience. She didn't tell me she was coming, right? I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. But Suzette, I am so delighted to see you here. My baby sister, she is an amazing young woman. You can imagine how extremely proud I am of her. Glad to have you here as well.
All right, everyone. Oh, Suzette made sure not to show herself on camera, but I'm glad you pointed her out. Everyone have a great remainder of the day. I look forward to seeing you at future webinars. And to my Cali folks, I miss y'all. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good evening.